Hello. Hi. Hi, everyone. Thanks. Thank you a lot. So I want to start by actually first thanking all the organizers for putting up all these events and for allowing us to be here to talk about CERN. It's a great pleasure for us to be here at IST, and thank you all for coming here, actually. So I'll introduce a bit about myself. My name is João Silva. I'm Portuguese, as you might have guessed by my name. And I graduated from this very same college in 2009 with a master's in computer science and engineering, better known by the acronym as MAKE. I was actually a teaching assistant here for 1 year for a class called Fundamentos de Programação. You might have heard about it. Well, and most recently, I've started working at CERN after working for 3 years for a consulting firm called XXI here in Portugal. And now I work at CERN as a software engineer working for the Advanced Information Systems Group, which is basically responsible for actually the organization's corporate information systems. So next to me, this Scottish gentleman is Derek Mathieson. He's the technical lead and principal architect of CERN's Advanced Information Systems Group. He's been working for CERN for at least 20 years. And that's pretty much it, Derek, right?
Okay, well, my part of the talk is basically giving you a bit of the overview of the organization and basically why CERN here and what does it do and what it's all about. CERN itself is an organization formed basically 60 years ago this year as one of Europe's first international joint ventures. And now it's basically the world's leading particle physics research laboratory. We've got an annual budget of 630 million euros. And a staff of around about 2,300 on site. Although, in fact, probably what's more important is not the 2,500 people who work there, but the 10,500 visiting scientists, basically half of the world's particle physicists, who collaborate with CERN's various activities and scientific program. It started, as I said, 60 years ago, with initially 12 member states from the center of Europe. And in fact, only last year, in 2013, we welcomed our 21st member, that was Israel, as the organization continues to grow and becomes really a worldwide laboratory. And in fact, this slide here gives you an idea of how much of a global organization we really are. In fact, there's someone in basically every continent of the world working on some parts of CERN's scientific program. And in fact, it was because of this, the large, widespread population and the need to communicate efficiently that CERN scientists Tim Berners-Lee and Robert Cailliau invented the World Wide Web. And in fact, that was when I first started at CERN back in 1989. One of the first projects I was actually working on was helping to debug what would become one of the world's first web browsers. This was long before the days of blue text and underlines to indicate hyperlinks. In fact, the hyperlinks were basically the numbers and square brackets at the end of the line there, and if you navigated, it's a new verb, you typed in the number at the bottom of the screen and pressed the enter key. So things have moved along quite a bit since then. But really looking back in CERN has got three fundamental parts to its mission. Obviously there's research, that's our raison d'etre, that's really why we're there, is fundamental physics research, expanding the knowledge of what we're doing and understanding how the universe works. But to do that, we need to develop new technologies. We need to basically innovate and create new technologies, new solutions to difficult problems. And to do that, we need to bring people together and train them and basically educate the scientists and engineers of tomorrow. And one of the unique parts of CERN, because of its international aspect, is that it really brings people together. There's around 90 different nationalities working on the CERN site. The picture down in the bottom corner there, someone's head was going through, is actually a photograph of the summer student program, where last year we brought 190 students to come and work at CERN, and they basically get the opportunity to work alongside the other scientists and engineers on some of the problems that we are trying to solve. And they do that as part of the study program, actually, as part of the university studies. But to really understand what CERN's all about, it's probably useful to give a little bit of history. I say some history in quotes because it's a kind of potted version which I put together, so you have to bear with me if not everything is strictly chronologically correct. Back in the end of around about 1875, a young Max Planck, what would become a future scientist, was asking his professor what he should study. And at that time, most scientists believed that physics was done. We know more or less everything. Kepler had pretty much sussed how the planets go around in the solar system. Isaac Newton had pretty much understood how gravity works. Physics was pretty much finished. They were just crossing the T's, dotting the I's, finishing off the last bits and pieces, but really it was a subject that was over. Fortunately, Max Planck didn't listen to his professor and studied a bit of physics. And in the last 150 years, quite a lot of change. Back in 1887, Michelson and Morley had a famously failed experiment which showed that light travels at the same speed in all directions. That led eventually, in fact, to Einstein's theory of special relativity. Around about the same time, Max Planck, fortunately who didn't stick to his professor's advice, studied blackbody radiation and ultimately was the precursor, although he didn't realize at the time, of quantum physics. And then, of course, in 1897, we had J.J. Thomson, who discovered the electron. And with the electron, we started the research which ultimately led to the discovery of the atomic nucleus and everything round about there. But if we look at our universe maybe from the outside and try to see where we are today, current theories really only account for about just under 5% of our universe. And the rest appears to be locked up in what's called dark energy or dark matter. Quite a different story from when Max Planck first was a student 150 years ago. And the best way to understand how the universe is to look back in time, to the point where it all began, right at the beginning. With telescopes and satellites, cosmologists and astrophysicists can go very far back. In fact, they can go back to what's called the cosmic background radiation about 400,000 years after the Big Bang. But you can't go any further with space-based and telescopic devices. Light just didn't propagate out of the universe at that point there. Everything was too hot for photons to actually escape. But there is another way. And by looking at the problem from the other side, what we can do is try to recreate the conditions that existed shortly after the Big Bang. And to do that, we need particle accelerators. And the LHC is the biggest and is the one that can get the closer than any other to the beginning of the universe. About 1/1,000,000 of a second from the beginning of the Big Bang. However, building and controlling such a machine poses its own set of unique challenges. This is a picture of one of the LHC dipoles. It's one of the strings of superconducting magnets which live inside the LHC tunnel. We've got about 1,200 of these magnets. And inside, there are basically 2 evacuated pipes. And inside there, bunches of protons fly about nearly the speed of light. In fact, it's 0.999999991 of the speed of light when they're at full energy. So they're whizzing around here. And basically, even to hold them in place, to keep them in this circular tunnel, we need to exert an enormous magnetic field on them. In fact, it's 200,000 times the field of the Earth. It's 8.3 Tesla. And to do that, we have to put an awful lot of current through lots of wires. In fact, nearly 12,000 amps go through the superconducting cables in order to actually cause this magnetic field. In fact, that's 7,600 kilometers of cables, in fact, that we're driving the current through. And in fact, the force exerted by this magnetic field on the magnet structure itself is in the region of 400 tons per meter. 400 tons is the weight of a Boeing 747, and that's exerted on the actual structure of the magnets themselves when they're under full energy. So it's an enormous engineering challenge. And that's just the 1,200 dipoles. In fact, overall, we've got 9,300 different types of magnets in the LHC. And all of them are held inside a large concrete tunnel, 27 kilometers long, and around about 150 meters underground, just on the border straddling France and Switzerland, and near the city of Geneva. The large installations you see at the 4 points here, these are where the 2 beams are actually brought into collision, and that's where the detectors are housed. This one here is Atlas. It's probably one of the most well-known ones. And effectively what it is an enormous 3D camera that can actually capture the events as they take place and then analyze what's happening during these collisions. But it runs faster than any ordinary camera. The beams themselves are arranged as strings of bunches, and inside each bunch of particles there's about 100,000 million protons. And altogether there's about 3,000 bunches going around this 27-kilometer ring at nearly the speed of light, so they travel around the ring 11,000 times a second, which meaning they actually pass each other 40 million times a second. So this camera is snapshotting these collisions all the time, And it's generating about 2 petabytes of data per second. Way more than we can handle within any normal way. So the first thing we have to do is throw away a lot of the data. In fact, roughly 1 million to 1 of the data we throw away, and we do that with specialized hardware. Really, in the actual detector itself, we will try to identify interesting events. There's roughly 19 head-on collisions for every time a bunch passes each other, and those are the ones we really want to see. So when we identify these interesting events, we'll snapshot it and pass it on to what's called the second-level trigger, where there we have a processor farm of around 15,000 processor cores who do a further analysis and throw away even more data. So we finally end up with the data heading towards our PC cluster at the computer center. And that's just one of the detectors. And in fact, there are 4 main detectors in the LHC. There's Atlas, but there's also the Alice installation, CMS, and LHCb, along with another 2 smaller ones called Totem and LHCF. And together, all their data gets funneled towards the computer center. In fact, on the aggregate data rate, we have about 10.5 gigabytes a second arriving at the data center, which has to be recorded, stored, and analyzed in real time. So we have around about 91,000 CPU cores to do that in the computer center. That's what you can see in the video up there. And we've got about 30 petabytes of storage on disk. That's about 70,000 hard disks, if you want to have an idea of what it really looks like. And that's on the first floor. And then underneath this data center, there's our tape robots. And there we have a further 70 petabytes of tape storage. These are the storage tech robots which are whizzing back and forward there. In order to actually analyze it. Total capacity is about 100 petabytes in the computer center, or roughly 700 years of HD video, if you want to look at it that way. But that's not enough. That just gets us the first level information stored and first level analysis. To actually understand what's going on in the LHC and actually analyze the data in detail, we need to use even more capacity. And that's when we invented the LHC Computing Grid. So here at the center is CERN. That's tier 0. And then from here, we ship the data over high-speed links to further 11 sites around the world. These are the tier 1 centers where they will store data as well as doing initial analysis and further processing. Before passing it on to what's called the tier 2 site, there's another 140 of them, including a couple in Portugal, where they'll do the further analysis and actually the detailed analysis. And that's where the physicists are typically sitting, analyzing the LHC data. Overall, we've got about 1.5 million compute jobs running at any one time on the LHC Computing Grid. So you could really see this as a global operation. But that's maybe the headline act, the accelerator. But in order to do the physics, we need to actually run the infrastructure. And as João indicated earlier, CERN's main activity is providing infrastructure for the physics to take place. And a vital aspect of this is the computer systems themselves that are used to control the particle accelerators. This is a photograph of the LHC control room. At the top there on the walls, you can see the fixed displays, which basically show you the status information of the accelerator. And along the bottom, you have the operator consoles, where the operators actually can interact with the detector, with the accelerator, and actually control the energy and the beams and everything. And the control system itself is basically a 3-tier architecture. Starting in the bottom, we have the front-end layer, which is basically the hardware. We use industrial control systems as well as specialist hardware that we develop at CERN. And wrapping all of it, we have what's called the controls middleware, which unifies the communication infrastructure between the front-end electronics and what's called the business layer. And this is a very important part of CERN's infrastructure, where we actually have everything to do with things like the accelerator control system, monitoring diagnostics, as well as machine protection. And machine protection is the business logic which ensures that commands from the operators make sure that the accelerator is always operated within design tolerances, making sure that the machine itself is protected. And then finally, at the top layer, we have the consoles, the fixed displays, and these are basically the direct interface from the operators and the accelerator physicists to the machine itself. You'll notice there's quite a lot of Java logos all over the place here. And in fact, Java plays a very big part in the software that we develop at CERN for the control system. A good rule of thumb, in fact, is everything which is above ground is written in Java, and anything which is below ground is typically written in C or C++. And it's also important to realize that CERN is not just the LHC. In fact, CERN is an accelerator complex. And we have many, many different accelerators. In fact, LHC is the last one in the chain, starting from our linear accelerator at the bottom through all the other intermediate accelerators before the particles get to the LHC. For the vast majority of these, they all use exactly the same software stack to control all of these accelerators. Overall, in the LHC, there's about 200 different types of hardware that we're managing with this system, with themselves covering about 270,000 different settings, different properties. Overall, we manage about 85,000 different devices in order to run the accelerator complex, with about 2 million settings that we have to manipulate at any time. As you can imagine, that even makes our network infrastructure quite a challenge in its own right. This is in the control center just behind those operator displays that you saw earlier. So running the accelerator, that's one aspect of it, but also we have to run the infrastructure, the boring stuff, cooling and ventilation, electricity, making sure that the lights are working, making sure the water supply is there, making sure the drains are working. All of this infrastructure for such a large site needs control as well. And for here we have another system called TIM, or the Technical Infrastructure Monitoring System. And this collects information from around 120,000 different sensors across the site. Altogether, there's about 100 million data points a day, which arrive at our central consolidator. And from there, we can actually monitor and actually even control different devices remotely from the operator consoles. Everything from, example, here's a snapshot of the cooling and ventilation system of the LHC, to electricity supply in the computer center. What's quite interesting about the TIM application, in fact, is it's a software system written in Java, where we provide all the tools for the operators to build their own screen. So they don't look very nice, but these are actually developed by the operators themselves. So not software engineers, but we give them the palette of all of the data points that exist and the tools to draw the pictures and hook them together. So they can actually build and evolve this system without software engineers being involved in it all the time. And it's not just static or interactive displays like this. We even have video surveillance systems built into it as well. So from the one place, you can watch what's going on, you can monitor the accelerator, you can control the accelerator. And as well as that, we record quite a lot of the information, so we can also then do post-mortem analysis and actually reconstruct past events and understand what's been going on and learn from them. So that's maybe one aspect of CERN. That's basically running the accelerators, but that's only really one side. There's a whole other side to running an organization the size of CERN, which is really in the domain of business computing. Isn't that right, João?
That's correct, Derek. So, like Derek was saying, CERN is a big place, and it's kind of a mix of a big science and the typical task which you normally do in every organization. So, like in every large organization, you have a vast amount of official administrative procedures, things like hiring people to firing people, accounting, logistics, purchasing, procurement, going on holiday, and all that stuff. And it's critical for CERN to try to basically minimize the overhead of all these procedures to basically ensure that they are handled efficiently and with the least possible burden for the users to basically allow them to focus on their core activities. So back in 1990 BC, so business computing was at CERN consisted of a homemade financial system, many independent HR databases, and lots of paper-based procedures. So for example, if you wanted to go on a holiday, you would basically take a paper form, you go to your secretary, then she would sign the paper, she would see if you actually have some balance to actually take the vacations, she would then pass the paper to your supervisor, he would then sign, and finally you get to be on vacations. So as you can see, like any paper-based procedure, it's very error-prone, as exemplified in this example. So in here you can see what typically happens when you basically deal with paper procedures. So what was actually ordered in here was there was an order of 3 books, 1 unit at each particular book, but you got confused with the position of the actual item in the paper procedure. So in the end, the person actually got 6 books to be delivered instead of the intended 3. So it's typical thing that can happen when you have all these paper procedures. So afterwards, CERN, to deal with all of these problems, we developed an application called EDH, which stands for Electronic Document Handling, and is basically our internal electronic forms processing system. And this is basically the most used application at CERN. So it handles pretty much everything from hiring to firing, purchasing, logistics, everything this application handles. And it produces roughly 250,000 documents per year. And to better understand how EDH works, the best way to do it is actually to illustrate with an example. And this is an example which EDH covers from end to end. So from the time that someone actually wants to purchase something to the moment that you actually pay the supplier to actually get this item from the stores. So the first thing you do is, let's suppose that we have this Clark Kent-like engineer living in Helsinki who intends to come to CERN and needs to order a certain quantity of FPGA boards to do his work, and he wants basically them to be delivered at his laboratory when he arrives. So the first thing he does is, from his office in Finland, he goes to basically EDH, he creates a new material request document, and from this, basically, he can choose one of the available catalogs and then order and select the item which he wants to buy. So you have several catalogs available at CERN. One of them is actually the CERN store, which he actually handled internally. It stores more than 30,000 items in stock at a particular time. And the other ones are actually business partners of CERN, from which you order specific categories of items. So for this example, basically, since it's an FPGA, we're going to go to use Farnell, which is a British distributor of electronic products. And basically, once you click the stores icon, you are basically redirected to the catalog of the supplier. But actually, not quite what happened. So what happens when you actually click the button to go to the supplier's websites, you actually, in the background, what actually happens is that there's a process which actually tries to create what you call a punch-out session with the supplier's commercial system. And what this does is we want to make sure the supplier knows who you are, knows that we are CERN, because we have negotiated prices with them. So when you show up the catalog from a certain supplier, they actually show you the discounted prices and a subset of items which you are allowed to buy from this particular supplier. And for this, we use an open e-commerce protocol called CXML. It stands for Commerce XML. It was created by a company called Ariba, which was now bought by SAP, or how we call it normally, it's SAP. And it's kind of similar to a very well-known protocol which you might have had in some class called Sistemas Empresariais Integrados, say, which is called EB XML. And when you discuss things like electronic data interchange and B2B, etc. So basically, this is what the punch-out setup request looks like. You essentially identify yourself as being CERN, and you define the endpoint, which then the supplier must contact yourself when you're done with your buy. So essentially, use this catalog as an exact catalog. You don't actually buy from the stores. You just go there to actually select your products, and then you go back to EDH to finish your acquisition. So the response is quite simple. It basically indicates if the handshake was successful, and also the actual URL which you actually should contact to go to the actual stores. And at this point, you actually have a session created with the store. So they know who you are, they know which items to show, they know which discount to apply to which particular item, because as you may know, we at CERN, we order bulk amounts of items. So we don't actually just order a kilometer of cables, we order thousands of kilometers of cables. So in the end, it's important for them to show up the negotiated prices and also to deactivate certain items which you don't want to be able to purchase in these particular stores. So back to our example, we now are within the catalog, and the user proceeds to search for the items which he needs to acquire. In this case, let's look for a Xilinx FPGA board. So he selects one board in there, and or 20 of them actually, and clicks on the buy button. And at this point, you actually get out of the actual supplier application, and you go back to EDH. And this happens because this buy item, buy action, is not actually a buy on the store. It's actually a punch out back to your system. So there's a protocol involving here as well, also using CXML, which basically defines that, okay, this person has ordered 20 FPGAs from this particular brand with this particular code, etc. So they get back to EDH, and everything is handled by EDH from this moment on. And it's completely transparent for the user as well. It's a great advantage because he doesn't care where actually the items come from. He just uses catalogs to search for products. And everything comes directly processed in EDH. And in EDH, you can actually adjust some parameters like where do you want actually the item to be delivered, when do you want it to be delivered, etc. And importantly, the budget code, which is kind of like a bank account which you want to discount to actually pay for this particular item. So then the document is sent, you sign electronically your document, so there are no procedures here, all completely electronic. You sign, you put up your password in there, and then the document is sent to our workflow engine, which basically takes care of who actually needs to sign the document to approve it completely. And this is like, one of our basic processes which we have at EDH. There are more than 60 or 80 of them. And this is one for actually financial purchasing. And as you can see, this is actually a VPMN model. So we use business process model notation to actually define the models. And then we use activity, which is an open source VPMN workflow engine to actually execute the process. Because as you know, VPMN as Beeple is just a definition of a process. It doesn't actually execute anything. You actually need an engine to actually take care of these activities and to actually execute anything on them. So basically, it's for multiple reasons that you want to do these signatures. You want to control this. You want to let you actually have the money to buy this particular item, or you want to make sure this person is ordering the 20 FPGAs because he wants to actually work on a level 1 trigger for some experiments and not just mine bitcoins or something like that. So this is one of the main advantages of using this kind of system. So in this case, we need an approval for a purchase which is up to 5,000 francs. So the actual total cost of these 12 FPGAs is roughly 1,200 Swiss francs. And we have different levels of approval because we don't want to bother the 10,000 approval if it's an item which is required at 5,000 K approval. So basically, it goes in advance in the workflow. Okay, and at this point, basically, the person who was supposed to sign is actually on vacation, so he's actually doing some skis in the Alps. But that's okay, because since EDH manages most of everything at CERN, we know that this person is actually absent from CERN. So we know that we have to basically dispatch or forward this signature to his supervisor, to his group leader. So we dispatch to them, and this person can actually be working in Athens, in a university, and she's the one who actually can go to EDH and sign the documents in place of the other person who actually was absent. So this person signs the document, and we advance in the process. Then we go to the 10K signature. But in this particular case, we can assume that the 10K signature is the same person which already signed the 5K signature. So we know that, and we don't actually oblige the person to actually sign again. So it just keeps automatically the workflow. So we advance in the workflow, and we approve the process. And in the end, the document basically gets approved, and it gets transferred to our financial system. So at this point, basically, the document gets approved. We transferred all the information of the document to our ERP. In this case, it's a commercial product called Qualiac. It's a Swiss product. French product. And which creates a CXML order to the supplier. And it's basically this moment where we actually create the order. So up until this point, there was nothing being done on the supplier. We just selected something from their catalog, and it's particularly this point where we actually try to buy something from them, and we actually place the order on the supplier's e-commerce store. And then, basically, we get the invoice from them, which can be two different kinds of invoices. So you can get the electronic invoice, which gets automatically integrated in our systems, or it can be actually a paper invoice. And for paper invoice, we actually have a system which basically implements some OCR recognition and basically reads the invoice and translates it to its electronically equivalent. So after this, basically, the goods get delivered to the laboratory, and Qualiac, the module of logistics of this particular ERP, knows that the item has arrived and communicates with the finance module to inform it that the goods have arrived, so you can now pay the supplier. And this is the final part of the payment. You basically do the final payment when you know that the actual items have arrived to you. So as you can see, there's a lot going on in this simple material request process. But for the end user, for the person who actually required the FPGAs in the first place, it just needs to do two things. Create material requests, define where you actually want to deliver them, and select them from out of some catalog. That's pretty much what it has to do. I mean, there's this whole approval process in between, all this integration with the CXML and all these boring standards which more or less integrate all these systems together. But in the end, for him, it's just select the item and click on some button to actually try to get it approved. That's all. And then it gets delivered directly to his office. So basically, the advantage of having basically this end-to-end process, we then can see actually the order in here. We can get the invoice, and we can go to actually this CET system, which is to control expenses. And in here we have a concept called the pipeline, which is quite important for CERN, because most of these orders are actually quite huge, so millions Swiss francs and above. And we want to basically make sure that even before the money is spent, that there's some kind of tool to track that the money is going to be spent. So this is the concept of a pipeline. You actually know that even though the money is still at CERN, it's going to be spent in the near future because there's a pending order which is going to be executed. This is another process which actually is covered by EDH, so it's basically a whole process from hire to fire or hire to retire, whatever you want to call it. And basically it's quite a simple process. There's someone, like Derek, who decides to open a new post in the organization, and he creates a new opening in the EDH. He defines the category that this person should work with, the hours, the description of the job, which skills are required, etc. And then this gets basically integrated into our electronic recruitment application, which has a front end visible to all of you. So if you ever want to actually apply for CERN, this is the tool which actually you're going to use. Internally, it's EDH who manages the opening of the application, but it's ERT, the electronic recruitment application, which actually manages all your data from your candidates. So basically, through ERT, we receive candidate applications, we receive their curriculum, motivation letters, recommendation letters, etc. And then finally, this information is stored in an HR database. for us to actually evaluate if the person is good or no good to actually come to CERN. So at this point, basically we evaluate all the candidates, and we decide that some of them actually go to CERN to actually do the final interview, to the selection board. And at this point, there's also a document, which an EDH, which takes care of reimbursing all of these persons of all the costs which they incur for actually going to CERN. So it's completely automatically done by EDH. And then one of these persons actually gets hired, and you actually arrive at CERN, you get your access card, you get your safety training, etc. You work, you get paid, you get appraised, which is more or less a fancy term for saying performance evaluation. You get we develop, so basically you go to conference, you go to trainings, etc. You register your holidays, and then finally you exit, and we make sure that these exit formalities are actually fulfilled completely. So you have to turn all IDs, all your access cards, and all your important stuff in there. So this is one facet of CERN as well, so basically the part of corporate IT. And we have actually also another important part, which is basically coordination and planning. As you can imagine, an organization like CERN has plenty of activities going on at the same time. And this is simple stuff like, for example, if there's a man who wants to go to the LHC tunnel and works on do some welding or some soldering, he goes on there and he probably wants to switch off the fire alarm before it actually goes. And when he actually finishes his activity, he wants the fire alarm to be actually switched on again. So this is the kind of activity which is actually done by Impact, which they'll be talking about.
Yes, so the Impact application is it's a tool that we developed a number of years ago, actually, which is a tool which is used to coordinate all the activities in the organization. So basically, as you can imagine, an organization such as CERN, there's a lot of things going on at the same time. And safety is a really important aspect to make sure that when people are working together on different activities, especially when, for example, with the size of LHC, they could be many kilometers apart. So you need to have some way of bringing all of this information into one place so you can then properly coordinate these activities. So this is a tool that we developed called Impact, which brings all this information into one place and then allows people to actually safely coordinate the activities. You get a kind of Gantt chart with a calendar in it so you can see what's going on in the organization at any particular area, any particular time. If you want, you can drill down and you can actually see the individual details of the activities which are going on. So, for example, if there's people working on the long shutdown, which is what's currently going on in the LHC, and they're repairing on and improving all of the magnets, then this is the kind of activities that you can see going on in the organization. But in fact, the tool covers more or less everything, not just the activities related to the construction of the LHC, but everything end to end. Even above ground, if you have someone cutting the grass, you have to make sure that the guy who's pruning the tree is not standing in a place where the guy's cutting the grass. So even the basic activities of running the organization are all coordinated through a single point in order to guarantee that people work safely. And because we know where people are and what the activities are going on at any particular time, the system itself can also integrate with the access system. What that means now is if you actually try to go down to the tunnel and work on a piece of equipment, the doors won't open unless you actually have already told people you were going down. And because we know you're there, then we can make sure that the working environment that you're in is a safe environment. We even tie into the what's called the operational dosimetry system. So if there's any risk, for example, you go into an area where there's a risk of radiation exposure, then we tie into that so we can actually measure the accumulated dose that people might have when they're working at CERN in order to make sure that everyone stays within the safe limits. And in fact, what we're working on, that was the execution phase of all the plans. If we take a step back, and actually, we also need to plan to do all these things. So we're moving from the execution back to what we call the operational strategic planning part of the organization, where we actually put together the future work of the organization, future accelerators that we might be building, or future buildings that we might be building. All of these activities need to be coordinated as well. And for that, we created a tool called Planbook, which is effectively it's a way of mixing together planning tools from different parts of the organization, where typically they're using tools like Microsoft Project, and we can bring together all of this information into the master plan. And from here, we can then look for conflicts and any possible activities which are maybe overlapping with each other, or resources which are expected to be used at more than 100%, for example. And with this opportunity, once we actually build a plan, then we can now tie together these two applications, Planbook and Impact, to make a single end-to-end tool, which you can then go from the operational and strategic planning process all the way through to the execution and the actual safety concerns that are related with that. But that's maybe one of the aspects of CERN, running the organization. The third tier that we haven't really touched upon yet is the idea of outreach. Oops.
To exercise in here. Basically this is also to give you a bit of a notion of what we actually use at CERN for some of the applications. So the last two applications which you just saw, Planbook and Impact, they're basically developed using this technology which you see in there. So Grails for the server-side framework. So Grails is a Ruby on Rails-like framework which uses Groovy, which is a dynamic language for the JVM, and GWT for the client side. GWT is basically a cross-compile from Java to JavaScript. So you basically write your client-side code in Java, and then there's a GWT compiler which translates your code, cross-compiles your code to optimize JavaScript. So this is basically the current stack which you're currently using for these kinds of applications. And of course, outreach. So CERN is an open lab, and we have permanent exhibitions all day, free visits, guided tours, etc. Last year we had roughly 85,000 unique visitors from more than 90 countries, and all of these managed by only a group of 10 people called the Visit Service. And we have all types of visits in there. So basically things from high schools who come with their teachers in groups of more than 20 persons, families, some VIP visits, so things like chiefs of state to actually Hollywood actors. And something which actually occurred to me by the first week I actually arrived there, I was going for a visit at Atlas, so one of the main experiments at CERN. And this visit got cancelled all of a sudden. So basically in the morning I got an email to tell me that the visit got cancelled. And basically it was because of this guy. He popped out, he got prioritized, and my visit got cancelled essentially. But it's okay since he's Morgan Freeman. So this helps be managed by all this application here called the public outreach. So as you can see in here, you can basically help you manage in an efficient way what actually happens at a particular point of time in terms of visits at CERN. So that's it, basically the application about public outreach. Then in somehow a similar way, we had this event last year called CERN Open Days. It was basically over some weekend in September where CERN opened its doors to the public with more than 40 activities on our site. So basically you could go there and drive robotic arms. You could actually drive cranes and all that stuff, or make superconducting magnets levitate in the air, all that good stuff. And we had basically more than 75,000 people over just one weekend, and more than 20,000 undergrad visits, which is quite a lot. We're not actually used to manage all this kind of flow of people. So for that, we actually developed several applications to handle all of this. So one of them is basically, a basic ticketing system, which basically issued just roughly 20,000 tickets. And this was actually used just for the underground visits, so things like going to Atlas, to CMS, and all the good experiments which they're described before. The second one is a flow monitoring application. So this is kind of like a dashboard-like application, which basically gives you statistics about how busy each particular point of interest is at a certain point of time, including how many people were actually underground at a particular moment. And this was used actually by volunteers at CERN, who were basically there are some information points, and people will come to them, okay, what can I actually visit in here now? And they look into this application and see what actually is free to go, essentially. Another part of this application is actually the people actually checking in. So basically we had the barcode associated with each particular ticket. Then we gave them an RFID tag, which they used to go into the tunnels, so we can actually see when they actually join the tunnel, when they actually leave the tunnel. And finally, there was also a mobile app, both for Android and Apple devices. Basically, this was a side project by a couple of people at CERN. It was developed using standard web technologies, so HTML5, CSS, and JavaScript. And we then used the basically PhoneGap to basically transform this application into a sort of native application. And this was basically the last application which we built for the CERN Open Days. And that's pretty much all we had to say. Basically tried to give you an overview of CERN from the perspective of an IT professional, not from a physicist. Because as many of you actually might think, CERN actually has more than 50% of engineers and technical workers, and not just physicists. So it's a common misconception about CERN that we're all just physicists in there, all trying to do theoretical physics when it's not actually true. So that's basically it. Thank you very much. Obrigado.
Yeah, it's okay.
Many thanks, Mr. Derek, Mr. João. Now, as as we experienced in the other talks, it's time for questions. If you have any questions for our speakers regarding CERN or any, I don't know, if you are interested in job applications, just ask, and you have to raise your hand.
Hi, thank you for the talk. At the beginning of the talk, you mentioned that there are several tiers before the data gets to the physicists.
Yep.
I'm interested in knowing how much time it takes for the data to go from the experiment in LHC to a physicist on the last tier.
I am not the right person to be asking a question like that, I'm afraid. I would be telling you lies if I gave you a direct answer. It's not very long, that's for sure. But honestly,
I'm not looking for an exact time. I mean, like, is it in seconds, minutes, hours, or days? Or?
Oh, I would say it's probably more in the minutes to hours, but it's not seconds.
Okay.
There's a lot of pre-processing work that happens actually in the computer center, where they do initial event reconstruction, and then there's a lot of work actually done in tier 0. And then basically this information is put into the cloud or the LHC Computing Grid, at which point physicists in Portugal, for example, would be sitting in their offices and they would write jobs who want to get the data, and the data is released in batches. And when the data is available, then they can start working on it. So there's usually a delay. It's not a sort of real-time system, you might say. It's not.
Right. Okay, thank you.
No problem.
Okay.
Good afternoon.
Hello.
You mentioned that you have a huge database to store all the information that you get from the experiments and etc. I'm interested to know what kind of safeguards do you have on that info, because it's a huge amount of data and I don't think that you can have backups or even you can duplicate that. So how do you manage that information?
Honestly, quite a lot of the data is duplicated. So quite a lot of the data is actually copied into the tier 1 sites. So there is nearly a whole copy already on the tier 1 sites as well as what's in tier 0. So there is a backup of that. The other point you might want to say, I mean, we make so much of the data that if we lose a little bit of it, we won't actually be that unfortunate. It wouldn't be that unfortunate. If it was the Higgs, unfortunately, then we'd be a bit sad. But no, so it's generally we have one copy of the data which is then replicated relatively quickly to the tier 1 sites, and then quite a lot of that ends up in the tier 2 sites as well. But there is no, we don't have another copy, no, absolutely.
And over time, how do you manage the space that new data coming in occupies? Because I don't think that you can keep a very long record of all the things you do, because you run out of space quite quickly.
Yeah, so exactly. We have about 25, well, sorry, we were making around about 25 petabytes of data, and we've got space for about 100 petabytes in the computer center. We're in the process of currently building another computer center in Hungary, in Budapest, where we're basically, there'll be another data center there with a smaller capacity but similar. At the same time, we're upgrading our existing computer center, increasing the storage capacity there as well. So we do have plans to keep growing in order to actually keep all the data, yes. Originally, a lot of this we were expecting to have around 12 petabytes a year, but the experiments now want to keep a lot more. So now we are working on the idea that it will be around about 25 petabytes. So yes, we have to invest a lot in keeping all this data.
Thanks.
Hello.
Hi.
I want to ask a question, if it's a rumor or not. If you found something faster than the speed of light. I heard something, I tried to research, but...
Yeah, no, you're right. I mean, there was a lot of news about it. Fortunately, we didn't. I would say fortunately, because if we did find something going faster than the speed of light, it would put quite a lot of what we understand of the universe today in doubt. So But in fact, there was an experiment that was done which was sending neutrinos to Gran Sasso. So that's basically, it's an experiment which uses the Earth itself as part of the actual accelerator complex. So we launched neutrinos and from Switzerland and pointed them through the Earth so that we'd pop out in a part of Italy called Gran Sasso. And there was a detector in Italy which we launched these neutrinos. Neutrinos are a particle which don't interact greatly with regular matter, but they interact a little bit. So if we use the actual chunk of the Earth as the thing we want them to interact with, then we can build an experiment around about this. And part of this experiment, they got the impression that some of these neutrinos were arriving faster than they should have done. And after a lot of research, they basically put their hands up and says, we don't think it's true, but we can't explain the results that we've got, which look like they're arriving earlier than they should. With a lot of research, a lot of digging, they discovered in the end that there was actually a faulty fiber optic cable, amongst other things, which were basically skewing the results. So no, we did not discover anything that went faster than the speed of light. But yes, normal thing, and sometimes the experimental results we can't explain, so we get other people to come in and help, and that's what was discovered.
And sorry, but is it is there some type of research that it's top secret or something like that? If yes or no?
Absolutely not. No.
No.
What about black hole creation there?
No, but I think it's actually quite an important point. CERN is paid by you guys. It's paid by the member states. Everything we do is open. It's an open lab. Come and see us. Everything we do, you can come and see. We have an open laboratory, as we said. We have 85,000 visitors a year. Come and have a look. If you're interested in what we're doing, the best thing to do is actually come and visit, and there's a lot to see when you're there.
May I? Hi.
No.
I'd like to ask some things. First, do you scan automatically the CVs that you get from your applicants?
Yes.
Do you do some kind of scanning to weed out the candidates?
Yes, with varying degrees of success. So yes, there's a commercial tool we use called TextKernel, which is basically a data processing and language recognition tool, which can look at CVs and recognize what university you went to, what grades you got, and quite often it makes quite a good guess. Sometimes it gets your phone number and your date of birth mixed up and things like this. But as a first level of processing, it's actually not that bad. And since we have tens of thousands of applications every year, it is quite helpful to get some kind of automated processing at the first level trigger, you might say.
Does it not like PDFs? I've heard they don't like PDFs, the automatic scanning.
No. Honestly, we will take your CV in any form it comes, and the tools we have.
Mine was PDF, by the way. Mine was PDF.
Okay.
No problem.
Another question. You've said you use several types of open source software. Is that correct?
Yes.
Do you open source your applications? They seem quite complicated and quite extensive systems, so they could be useful for other.
Generally, the rule is if we can, we will. Sometimes it's not practical if we have things which are already cross-licensed. If we're having commercial software built in, then it's hard for us to open source all of it. Or if we have, unfortunately, in the open source market, there are also lots of mutually incompatible open source licenses, which also trips us up sometimes. But we do have quite a lot of big projects which are entirely open source. And in places where they're not open source, then we will work with people who would like to get the code in some way, and we'll try. As I say, what we do is for you, it's for everyone. It's science for mankind, science for peace, as we have to.
What kind of license in particular?
So again, sorry?
The kind of license you use.
So in fact, one of the biggest projects that we have, which is the CERN document server, which is basically a system for managing citations, books, libraries, and everything around it, is open source under GPL.
Okay. Do you open source your big system of managing all the parts of CERN? That seems interesting because it's a quite complex system. It could be useful for other similar enterprises.
We get contacted regularly, and we are always willing to talk. There's a whole department in CERN whose job is to basically spread the knowledge. So yes, if it's not, I mean, we didn't necessarily write it as an open source piece of software, which means it will be some effort to open source it, but it could be done, absolutely. And if there's enough interest, no problem.
Hi.
Hi.
You mentioned that you're recording data in your detectors 24/7, sort of, right? I'm curious, does that mean that you're actually running experiments 24/7, and that there's particles running around the accelerator at all times, pretty much?
Not all the time, but when it's running, when they fill it in the machine and it starts to run, then the beams usually run for roughly 10 hours at any time. But there's experiments going on all the time. I think the headline act is the LHC, but there's loads of other things going on. And when I used to work in the accelerator complex as a student, I had a pager, not so different from this. And you would get called in the middle of the night because they were doing machine physics. So when the particle detectors aren't running, they want to tune the machine. So they'll do stuff overnight, all this thing. So yes, it's running all the time. The lights don't go out at CERN.
Interesting. And a follow-up question then, you mentioned detecting sort of significant events. I wonder if you could give us a little sense of the kinds of criteria you use for, I mean, how do you detect what counts as a significant event, and how are you sure that you're not missing important data?
Yeah, I'm afraid this is well beyond my area of expertise. Sorry.
Fair enough. Thanks a lot.
Pass the mic.
Hello.
Hello.
I know that when you are applying for the summer course program, summer student program, I think.
Sorry.
Sorry.
One more time.
Mas próximo, okay. When you are applying for the summer student program in CERN, you have to choose 3 fields of study. And if you choose information technology, what will you do specifically there?
More or less any of the things that we've just discussed. So basically, the way the summer student program works is each of the different groups at CERN make a proposal for topics that may well be interested for students to work on. And then there's usually a big portfolio of different areas that you could be working on. So when you choose, I want to work in IT, then you'll get a big portfolio of possible projects. And there's a matching process where we try to match the interest of the students with the type of work that we're doing. But the type of work we do is just everything. Yeah.
Okay, so you can end up working on more something like particle physics or some stuff like.
If you say you don't want to, then we won't make you. And if you'd rather work on an ERP system, then no problem. If you'd really like to get your hands dirty on the accelerator, no problem as well. It's all there. You just make it clear on your application the kind of field you want to go into. If you're super specific, we only have one of those jobs, and obviously you might limit your chances a bit. If you're a bit broader, then you get more chance.
Okay, thank you very much.
No problem.
Hello.
Hello.
I have a question that goes from physics to nanotechnology. I don't know if you can answer. I've heard and I read in several books that human beings can't see an atom directly.
Yep.
What we see is Israel. How can we manipulate atoms in nanotechnology fields with all these promises that that's written, all that achievements that we will have in the future? How can we manipulate something just with Israel and not with the atom itself?
I am not a physicist.
Okay.
That pretty much answers your question, I'm afraid. I'm really not the right person to be asking.
Okay.
I'm just an IT guy.
Okay. Thanks anyway.
No problem.
Hi there.
Hello.
Regarding the LHC experiments, when you have to do maintenance, do you have to actually stop the experiments, or is it feasible, or do you have to model it like a Jenkins box model?
It depends. It depends very much. At the moment, there's a long shutdown, and they're taking the opportunity to do lots of maintenance. We ran the accelerator for quite a long time, for I think it was 18 months in one go, longer than we normally would run it. Usually we run for just under 11 months at a time. So we ran the machine for a long time, and now there's an opportunity when they're basically upgrading the energy. I'm probably aware that the old LHC ran about 3.5 TeV per beam, and now we're basically doubling the energy when we switch it back on again. So to do that, there's a lot of maintenance going on, and so they're taking the opportunity to take everything apart and put it all back together again. While the machine's actually running, generally speaking, they don't actually do maintenance, but they can do some limited maintenance. Yeah, so it depends where you want to do. If you're fiddling with the inside of the detector, no, you can't do that when the beam's on. Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Hi there. It seems to me like CERN is a big data haven for scientists working on that area. Do you make available some of your big data or the total of your big data to outsiders working in fields not specific to physics, but let's say for IT?
Yes. There's a few examples actually. There's some European projects that we're part of. We will do. There's a European grid for e-science, for example, the EGE project that we were part of. There's also there's something called Mammo Grid, which is actually doing for breast cancer research that we're part of as well. Oh gosh, there's many actually other separate fields where CERN is participating, either applying or supplying technology or just working together in terms of we have some expertise in big data or detector technologies or these kind of things, and we try to help that technology transfer into other domains as well.
Thank you.
Hi. Good afternoon. I have a question for João. How did you get there? It was difficult or not?
Yeah, it wasn't easy, but basically the process is quite standardized. So if you go to our cern.ch/jobs, you can actually see more or less what to expect in an interview from CERN. But more or less, you send your curriculum, it gets processed by several people from HR. Then you basically have some technical interviews online, so some kind of puzzles-like things. And afterwards, there's a video interview as well. And then you get invited to a selection board in Geneva. So you actually stay there for an entire day, being grilled by all these guys with programming questions on the board, etc. So usual stuff. And then there's a decision. But overall, it's a long process. And
yes. But it's possible, and CERN is hiring all the time. There's lots of opportunities working at CERN, not necessarily even as a staff member. You also remember there are lots of other programs. There's even a specific Portuguese program sponsored by the FCT.
Yes, there's a program I'm not sure if all of you are aware of, but it's sponsored by ADE, which is Agência de Inovação, which sponsors an internship at CERN, which can go up to 2 years. So basically you are given a 1-year contract, which can then be extended to 2 years. And after those 2 years, you can actually get a fellowship contract, which is up to 2 to 3 years. And after the fellowship, you can get a staff position. And after staff position, you can actually get a permanent position there where you stay there forever, basically.
And another question. CERN is just for high-grade college students, or anyone who is interested in can apply and do some research with you?
I mean, we're open to a whole variety of different professions, different abilities. It's a huge organization. We do lots of things. So I think there are many different opportunities at many different levels. And if you're interested, then certainly have a look, see if there's something that interests you, and then have a go.
Anyone else?
Yeah.